I'm trying to think of how did you first get a hold of us?
Through Samira.
Yes.
That was, one person. There were two people that referred me to you guys that, totally separate. One knew you, Samira, and the other one saw your article in the paper and said, I think this is what you've been talking about. Maybe you should contact them. So, without even knowing if it would lead to something.
Yeah. And then you went to coffee with her. And
yeah,
I was annoyed
Chicory.
because it was 30 minutes on the calendar. And we had a lot of things to do. And then 2 hours later, she's like, where were you?
In all fairness, I said, watch your time because I have a tendency to be really, really relaxed. If I get relaxed, I don't pay attention to time. So, yeah, we had a very good conversation.
I have no sense of time, so it makes sense.
We weren't good together.
Yeah, so we talked, that first conversation was interesting, though, because what I found interesting about your background when you started telling me about it was a long history of working in social services, then working in nonprofits, both as an executive director and a board member. And then at the time, you were like halfway through the Masters of Nonprofit Administration. And so I remember sitting there going, part of me was like, why does she want to do this? Does she understand that we're trying to do like for-profit companies? At the same time, we're trying to like obviously create impact. And at first I was like, she's going to come at me. Like she's going to be like, what are you talking about? Like that's not possible. Or, but yeah, so explain some of your thinking when you were looking us up and as I told you more about us at Chicory that day.
Well, some of the things that I've been thinking about in nonprofit really were the conflicts that you were answering in what you were doing. Is, why are we not operating more efficiently? Why do we not understand that some of this might be able to be moved back into the for-profit sector, and the needs there would be met better than what we can do in nonprofit? It seems like there's this assumption that because it's nonprofit because we're helping people, it has to be nonprofit. And a lot of people don't understand that. They'll even say, the ideas I have now, is that nonprofit? Because it's helping people. And but when you think about it, there's a lot of things out there in the for-profit sector that help people. We just accept that it's okay, it's there. And so it's not the best function. If it can be in the for-profit space, I think it's the best place for it to be. So that's where it's coming from. Well, maybe a little different than most people in nonprofit. But I also wanted to understand the innovation you guys were doing so I could bring that back to the nonprofit sector and make it more interesting for me.
Yeah, so talk about this, because I think when I walked out of that meeting, my thought process was, she'd be really interesting for this cohort because she comes from a completely different background than most of the other people that we're recruiting, but a background that I think understands why we're doing what we're doing. But when we came out of that, we were still like, it wasn't like clear that you were considering being someone in the cohort. Because I think at that time it was like, if I could get involved or if I could understand what you guys were doing. And I think I said, I'd really like you to consider being in the cohort. So talk us through I haven't even heard this story, talk us through your process of how do we go from there, that first conversation, to you might want to be in the cohort.
It was kind of like, you mean the world is round? It wasn't anything I considered.
Yeah.
And so I left going, well, gosh, I wonder what that means. Now I got to go back and look at this information you guys have out there in terms of being part of it. And I thought this would be an excellent way to understand the process, is to be doing the process. So I went home and just kind of casually shared it with my daughter, who's knows about and this whole sector is about. And she was like, that is the most incredible opportunity you could get. Do you understand what is about to happen with this group? And I was like, no, I don't. So then I realized I needed to know more, and I did contact some other people who knew you guys and what you were trying to do, and I kept getting the same message. So, but I had a moment of, this is so different than what I was thinking I might do, But as I reflected on it, what I had decided 6 months before is I wanted the opportunity to be involved in something innovative that was making big change and stepping outside those normal pathways to helping people that haven't been effective. And I kind of had a mental list of things that would be great to tackle. And I thought, okay, I asked for it, and now it's here. I should do it. The hard thing was that I have a strong nonprofit, social work, psychology, mental health, like all these aspects, background, and not a whole lot in the way of technology, some business concepts, but not real strong. And I was real concerned about whether or not some of the people I was seeing in the cohort, if I would be able to keep up. Mm-hmm. So that's probably the thing I thought about the most, is how am I going to overcome what I don't know in this area. And really through my schoolwork, I just had touched on some of these concepts around design thinking and social entrepreneurship and these new, not necessarily new, but new in this approach to social impact. And so I really felt like I would have to overcome a lot to be involved.
I think that was actually one of the things that attracted us to you as a person in the cohort, is that you were very upfront and honest about that. Mm-hmm. And something we talked about when we were recruiting people was we wanted people who were going to be, we said, humble to the process. So in the sense that you weren't going to march in and say, I can solve all these problems, I know how, just give them to me and I'll fix it. Mm-hmm. But really take the time and the patience to go through those things. Mm-hmm. And so when we heard you start to question, can I do it? To us it was that's a good sign, mm-hmm. because she's going to be willing to learn. Yeah. I wonder what was so the other cool thing is you're from South Bend. Mm-hmm. The only one of the 5 that's from South Bend. And I remember that first week when we shuffled you guys around to however many people you met in the first 5 days, you kept saying, I didn't even know mm-hmm. a lot of this existed. Talk us through what that first week was like.
I always think it's very interesting in my experience being in South Bend and having grown up here. I left for a while and came back. Is that people who are not from here teach me more about the area than I know. And, you just kind of get on autopilot and you know what you know. So that wasn't any different than that week. And what was really great is I was learning about what was going on in downtown and the south side and west side of South mm-hmm. Bend. And those areas I didn't know a whole lot about. I think probably what was most impressive to me is how you guys laid it out for us to get to know what was going on that was relevant to financial inclusion. So we were in all the spaces we needed to be to know what was really going on. And I felt, that to me was a really important time because it prepared me for what was coming next and how to start connecting with people and learning about what does this mean. Mm-hmm. So
I remember in those early days we spent a lot of time talking about more broadly what is impact entrepreneurship, mm-hmm. how do you think about profit impact alignment, and I think you struggled a little bit with that, and then we always talk about there's a very clear switch that flipped mm-hmm. at one point, and for us that's clear, and I'm curious kind of how that felt for you. When did you make that switch from questioning whether you belonged and if this was right for you to
well, I think first of all, I was trying to understand what this was and how did this fit with what I already knew. So with nonprofit work, and we were going for big social impact, and what that meant in my mind versus what it meant in everybody else's mind. Is that primary, is that secondary? How do we guard that? How do you guard the mission around whatever work you're doing? And so I don't know. I don't know, I certainly have been always open to applying for-profit principles in the nonprofit sector. I don't know when that switch really happened around that. I think it was more where I felt this big change was getting enough knowledge to know what it was I wanted to do, what I wanted to focus on. Like, so much of it was so interesting, and still is. I love every project everybody's doing, and I want to know more. I found myself wanting to listen to what they were talking about and wanting to do everything. But I think it was because what I was working on, although it was interesting, wasn't the thing that would make me get up every day and want to do it. And that kind of happened in October when I pivoted towards something where it was something that had been on my mind for years, and figuring out how I could really drill down and on a particular aspect of it. It became super interesting, and things started falling into place.
So before we jump into like what it actually is that you decided to work on, what was it like starting with problems instead of ideas? Because this is something that we've been trying to explain to a lot of people, right? That what makes us different is most incubators and accelerators, you apply with a team and you apply with an idea, and they decide which ones they love and then try to help you. We do the exact opposite. We just take people that we think have a lot of potential and start with this big, vast, vague problem set. So what was it like for you to start at that stage?
I tend to be a problem solver, so I take the information that's in front of me and I start figuring out how to make that work, get better. The piece that was tough for me was, and I do it all the time, so I wasn't even aware I was doing it, was what I needed to do in between. So before I had the solution, I really needed to talk to the people and really gather the information to understand what the problem is before I'm solving it. And this is kind of nuanced in the way that it's different for me from what I was doing before, but slowing that down and really understanding what my assumptions are, and do those withstand the conversations I have with people who have the problem. And so I don't know, that to me was like a really tough thing. You guys would pull the reins back and be like, oh, I did it again. And but I think mostly when I finally got to the point where I could understand it, and that's what I think was taking me time. I think even if I had pivoted sooner with my idea, I still needed time to work through that process to get out of my own way. And when I finally got there, and I don't know if you remember this, but I found all this research that validated every assumption I had. And when I went to talk to the people, it wasn't right. And I was ready.
Can you give us an example of that?
Like the main thing, what I'm working with, people in recovery, going through, who have addictions or who are going into recovery, that if you manage their money, you found a way to manage their money, they would have less of an incidence of relapsing. And that connection, although they were able to make it in the study, is not accurate. It is only part of the picture. And so this idea that somehow I could control what was happening for these people by somehow putting controls or supports around their money, that I could solve this important problem. And if I didn't listen when I first had those conversations with people in recovery, I would have totally missed the boat. What I'm working on would not have worked. So, that to me was just such a huge thing. And the person who was working with me on it, kind of the same thing you guys had to go through. They'd be like, no, you're not getting it. And so but I finally realized it was the research that I was validating it there instead of listening to what the person was telling me. And I even showed them the research, thinking, see, you don't know. And since I figured that piece out, I have had so much success with everybody I'm talking to about this, because I get what it is they need, at least at this point.
So tell us the problem you're working on.
Okay, so the problem I'm working on is working with adults who are in early recovery to improve their financial health. and doing that through a money management, financial planning system. And I'm in the beginning parts of that, so I don't exactly know what that is going to be, but what it will do is offer some sort of outsourcing support for managing their finances while they're in their early stages of recovery, so that they can use their own resources to put towards their recovery process.
Yeah, so one of the things that I remember we learned from doing this cohort, which we didn't understand well before we started, was that a lot of the things we're looking for when we talk about opportunities for building these companies is like contradictions in kind of how a system or a bunch of stakeholders work. And I remember when you came in we had those weekly one-on-ones, and you came in and you were still working on the other problem, the volatile income. And we went through our 15-minute meeting about that, and then at the end it was like, I don't know how it was from your side table, but it was almost like you were confessing. You were like, I gotta tell you guys something. I don't really want to work on this anymore. And in fact, I have this other thing that is just keeps sticking that maybe I want to work on that would be better. And it was almost like you needed permission for us to tell you it's okay to drop, kill that. What do you want to work on? And then as soon as you started talking about this recovery and people managing their money and recovery at the same time, from our side of the table, we got really excited coming out of that meeting because you could tell that you were in on it, and that you felt like you could find an opportunity. But one of the most powerful things I think you said to us was you named that contradiction for us after a few weeks, which was there are people that are experts in recovery and there are people that are experts in financial management, and they're not the same people. And so when someone is in the middle, in dealing with recovering from addiction, and they're trying to figure out how do I stay in recovery while also managing my money, they're getting pulled in two different directions. That contradiction right away was boom, there's got to be a better way to do that, which was exciting for us. How did it feel for you when you got to that point?
It was really good because up to that point, understanding the process for me was challenging because I kept wanting to go to, I see a problem, here's the solution, instead of looking for that point or contradiction, like you were saying, this thing where this need isn't being met, and this idea that it's this one little piece. As you talk about recovery, it's this big to get in this little piece. And that was just no, we go out and we solve the problem. And so I think at that point, that was the first time I saw what you guys were trying to get me to see, how to find that. And that it made sense. And since that point, even if I think in broader terms, it's always in relation to this very specific spot that I'm working in. And I don't find myself losing track of that spot like I was on before then. I kind of was saying what I thought it should be with the other problem, but I just wasn't getting it. I wasn't getting what that meant. So that was kind of the part two I was talking about. I don't know, it took me the time of really studying what everybody else was doing, coming back to the drawing board a lot of times, to when it finally all made sense.
So let's go back to that meeting where you told us that maybe there's something else you want to work on. What got you to the point where I was all right, I want to bring this up as something that I want to work on?
I was pulling my hair out. I was leaving work feeling frustrated, and it is kind of a red flag to me. If I'm working really hard to make something happen, then it's me forcing something. So and that's probably not going to work. And so I had gotten to a point, I wasn't sure how to identify it, but I just thought, I need to step off of this one. I don't know what direction I'm going to go in. This thing that you referenced that I had back here is I've had for a long time, thinking about when people are compromised, they struggle managing their finances. And so that was a very general thought. Didn't know how to get that little piece out of it. But it was at that moment, I think you had suggested, one of you had suggested that I write down things I really want to. And I went home and I was working on all these crazy ideas, and all of a sudden I thought, that's all I think about is this other thing. So when I presented it, I think you guys picked up on all my energy around it, is because I think it's really important.
Yeah. So you decided to work on this other problem. You go through this kind of process of trying to reconcile the different voices that you hear from the research and from people's stories. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, it's like 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, and Maureen's like, I'm going to Colorado.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, I had, at the point I decided to make this pivot, I was going to a event that surrounded people in recovery. And so I knew people there who could tell me give me some feedback on what I was thinking. And being that I'm not in recovery, I don't have that like firsthand knowledge. It's just what I observe. And so as I was discussing it with people, I had the opportunity to be there in Bowling Green and come back, to Kentucky, or to go to Carbondale, where my son is, and connect with, in this very small community, this large recovery center. Yeah. And I thought, well, this is probably like the best place to go, because it's, there are a lot of people in close proximity to one another, where the other places I would really have to work harder to connect. And so, and plus I would see my son, so there was like that too. But mostly too, he was going to help me connect with people. And so as I started looking at it closer and started connecting with people that I did know there already, it just showed me lots of opportunity. Yeah. One that more than I even realized at that point. I thought I would go for 3 or 4 days working on that idea.
We joke about this all the time. We would wake up every morning to a new Slack message. It's like, not coming back today. Like I got boom, 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 boom meeting to go have. Yeah. I think it was like, it was at that point, like when you told us what you wanted to work on, I think we sensed like the energy you had behind it. But when you did that, both the Bowling Green trip and the first trip out to Colorado, I think that's where Maria and I was like, that's like that instinct. Because like we didn't talk, it wasn't like we necessarily said like, oh, you should go find a place. Right. It's just like you just came in and said, I'm doing this. Like that instinct to just start to do things. And like I consider that to be part of that entrepreneurial thing that we look for. And I think like ever since then, it's just been like building. I mean, we see like a change in your confidence around being able to start something and not being afraid of it.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to some of my original concerns is there's a lot that I don't know still. And I look to you guys to help me do that, to, figure out Google Forms and to figure things out that I haven't been in a position to have to use in this way, and that I know is out there. I just don't know what it is. And to take the time to learn all of that in order to pursue this idea, it'd be years before I could really get to the idea. And so, that is like a big adjustment. Although I'm really good with like, let's outsource. It doesn't have to be me knowing it, but that having confidence, pursuing this in spite of there being a lot of things that I don't know, and like readily, so I have to think and plan ahead, like, okay, so how am I going to capture that, and what is the best way to do that, is like super grateful to be in here doing that instead of being on my own trying to figure that out.
What's it been like for you being part of the cohort?
I love everybody in this cohort. I love them. There's like similarities and big differences that make it so special. And the way, and this is what you and I connected on when we first met, is like people like who think like I do, all being in the same room, like who contemplate the most interesting or not so interesting things. And are willing to put it out there. Yeah. And that, to me, I feel like I'm at home when I'm here, is to be able to like be with people who are cultivating this kind of thought process.
So you have big plans coming up sometime this week.
Yes.
This is, I think, part of the things that you're you've adjusted to really well is kind of some of the ambiguity.
Yes.
But tell us about, so you're working on this problem, trying to help people in recovery from addiction manage their finances. So what's next? We have about a month and a half left.
1 month.
1 month. Oh shoot, yeah. 28
Yes.
days, no pressure.
Yes, this is the thing I try not to pay attention to at all because I'd be panicking. Right now what I'm that whole being patient part is real important because the support around what I'm trying to accomplish is really strong, and support to move it through quickly. But given the population I'm working with, there are a lot of things that can get in the way and delay things. And so I'm trying to be real aware of that and patient. But what I'm hoping to do in my next step, maybe at the end of this week, is going back to Carbondale, Colorado, and meeting with a group that I'm calling my steering committee, who are people in recovery, who can look at the ideas that I am pulling together and this format that I'm constructing, and find out, test the assumptions I'm making based on the information they gave me. And so from there, we'll be building our relationships together, because I hope to hold them together and do a pre-test with this group on the model I create, hopefully within the month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now that so front end, we talked about what it was like learning a lot about South Bend. Mm-hmm. Now that you're on the back end, getting ready, as I think we see it, to launch like a company, mm-hmm. How do you see South Bend?
I'm really excited to see what's going on in South Bend. As time has gone on with our cohort, I've gotten to know more and more of the network that you created, but especially your role in that, and this whole growing community of people creating and building is so exciting, along with what's going on with our mayor and the government he's creating and the developments he's doing in South Bend. I am so proud to be, living in South Bend, mm-hmm. first of all. But it makes me very hopeful that this city is going to be doing more and more as time goes on. And instead of being like the worst place to live, it's becoming like the coolest place to be. Yeah.
So we just asked you a bunch of questions. Have any questions for us? Remember, we treat feedback like a gift.
Let me think here. Of course, I ask pretty regularly, what's next for INVANTI. Very much am excited for the next phase. I think everybody in our cohort agrees we don't want to leave, and we want to be protective of our space here. That's getting cooler and cooler by the minute.
You said something the other day when we were in there we were talking about recruiting for cohort 2, and Maureen just kind of gets this look on her face. Like, Maureen, what is that? She's like, well, I'm in your cohort, and I don't know how I feel about there being other ones. I think I reassured you that you'll always be cohort.
The first.
This is what we talked about with you guys. We are learning from you as much
mm-hmm.
as the other way around. And I couldn't, I think you in particular, we were able to learn a lot from on the execution side of things. As somebody who has run a big organization and sat on boards, there's something about your skill set that you brought that we've been able to learn from as we're thinking about how to support you guys and as we're growing ourselves. And so I think that your place in cohort 1, Maureen, will always never
good.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, I know. I threaten to hide behind trees and stuff. But I think that is an important part, is like what's next for our group as we are mm-hmm. evolving, and how do we keep build around us these supports and people with skill sets that can help us understand how to keep growing this idea into.
I'm curious, what is that like as you look? What does that mean to you? Like, what are the kind of things that you want around you?
Well, I think that on the innovation side, that's really the important part for me. Is I've got my bag of tricks, but they're kind of old, and like some of these concept and tools, I want to keep staying in contact with people mm-hmm. who know them and who can help me grow them. and that I can present, like, I'm trying to create this, and then somebody can say, oh, these are the options you have out there that work really well. That to me is not something that I find readily available anywhere else, and I don't know why. I don't know why that is. So, I don't, and maybe it's within the realm of innovation, that I need to be thinking about developing my relationships there. Like some of the other things, like the business side of it and how do you scale and that type of thing, I feel like there's probably more supports or resources I can draw off on more than the innovation side.
I'm really curious, because I don't think we've talked about this, but I'm really curious to answer this question. So like when you say scale, and when you think about it for you and Bedrock and like this concept that you're developing, like what do you imagine? What does that mean?
Well, so far, because I've had contact with companies that are interested in what I might be developing, scaling to me is like spreading it to it'll be across the country and wherever these companies are and where they're reaching out to. So like it doesn't feel like to me when I think of it as like, I want to be in this many states by a certain time. It's going to be really more where the businesses are who are interested in this and where they happen to be providing services. So that's one side of it. That's from the treatment center side. From the individual side, I haven't really put thought to that, like where that's going to take me. As people come into treatment centers, they're coming from everywhere. Yeah. So, what does that mean growing that way? I'm not sure. It's
interesting because we have this conversation a lot where we'll get them to understand that we kind of start with problems and bring in people like you to work on them. And the first question they'll ask will be like, are these South Bend problems or are these like national problems? And sometimes we have a hard time explaining to them that like for us, those are two and the same.
How would you respond if somebody came back to you with that?
Well, in this particular case, having a place to pilot my program and launch this business from has to be a place where they've got the networks are evolved, and so it's going to have to be somewhere else. South Bend, their recovery in South Bend is just it's not at the point that this would work right now as a pilot. So it's not even an option to start here, but it certainly will be something that will be valuable to the people in South Bend to grow the recovery here once it's designed. So that's probably what I would say initially. The other part of it is, to me, it's really important, especially being somebody from South Bend, is to limit myself this way and try and make this work here would mean that probably nobody would get it, because there just isn't enough of developed services here to make this a pilot here work. So in order for South Bend to have it and improve what's going on, it's going to have to take place somewhere else who does have it. And the other thing is I have the connections somewhere else where I don't have that necessarily right here. It will take me more time to develop that. So that's how I look at it, is it benefits South Bend for me to do this.
I actually think that's a really interesting point. So we worked really hard developing our network of what we were calling like problem experts or problem validators in South Bend. But on our kind of what we were thinking about inside of financial inclusion, recovery was not something that we had touched on, and so that's something that you brought. But I think as a result of that, we didn't have our list of 10 people in South Bend for you to talk to first.
Right.
And so I think really interesting for us watching your journey has been how you have navigated kind of making up for our lack of network in this space with your own kind of personal networks, and really just sprinting really hard at it.
Along that too, if it weren't for like that beginning when you talked about those first few weeks and what that was like, because we weren't just in South Bend, we were in Chicago and Ann Arbor, and we did a number of things, and we had people from other areas than just South Bend. Is learning about the financial part was the important piece for me to do the other. And so even though I may not have had specific things, well, there's 2 points to this. About recovery, I had the important stuff in order to look at the recovery piece. Also, pretty much anybody who was helpful to me on the financial stuff had experience with people in recovery. And that was a very interesting thing, is that they started talking to me and saying, oh my gosh, this is so important because, and they would tell me why. So they were your people. It all came together. It was those people that really, started pushing me through. So, yeah, I think the important part was financial inclusion.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Anything else you want to share?
What I really want to share is how much fun it is to be in Invanti and all the people who surround Invanti, like South End Code School, the people who work for the city, and the esteemed people. So I think what I've noticed with the other people in the cohort is that they have been able to make lots of connections, and even though they were coming from somewhere else, I see them building networks and having like a whole social network around them, and seem to be having fun. Now they might say something different, but that's what I observe, and that I attribute to your preparation.
We're very social people.
Well, your parties help, Maureen.